After a long, exhausting day at the hospital, I came home completely drained, the loneliness weighing on me, just wanting a little peace in my own home. But the moment I opened the door, everything inside me shattered. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking and I collapsed when I saw what was inside. I'm glad you're here. Stay until the end and tell me what city you're watching my story from. I want to know how far it has reached. When I pushed the door open, a strange feeling washed over me. The door wasn't locked. I frowned, trying to remember if I had left it that way this morning, but I was sure I had checked it before leaving. The living room curtains were crooked, and the evening light filtered through the gap, leaving patches of dim light on the wooden floor. The television wasn't on. The house was eerily quiet. I put the box of bread on the kitchen table and quietly called for my husband. "David, are you home?" No one answered, but from the living room I heard a strange sound. A muffled laugh, then heavy breathing as if someone was trying to stifle it. My heart was pounding for no apparent reason. I walked slowly down the hallway, the heavy bag still slung over my shoulder. The moment I set foot in the living room, the bag slipped from my hand and fell to the floor with a thud. Right in front of me on the couch, David and I had bought together to celebrate our 30th anniversary. There he was, lying back, his shirt open, and on top of him, Sarah, my daughter-in-law, with her hair disheveled, her dress askew, one hand resting on David's chest. They hadn't heard me come in until the thud of the bag made them jump. Sarah turned around abruptly, her eyes wide, her face pale. "Mom!" she exclaimed in a trembling voice, quickly getting off David. He desperately tried to fix his shirt, stammering, Emily, it's not what you think." But I wasn't listening anymore. My mind was blank, as if the whole world had crumbled beneath my feet. The wedding photos on the wall, me in my white dress, him smiling radiantly. By my side, seemed to watch me in silent, helpless witness. The evening light came through the window and drew a lonely line on the floor, just like my heart at that moment. I didn't say a single word. I turned around and walked quickly towards the door, ignoring Sarah's cries. "Mom, please listen to me. Let me explain." David was shouting something too, but all I could hear was the sound of him stumbling, maybe trying to get dressed while running after me. I didn't care. I opened the door and went out into the street. The cold evening air hit my face. I got into the car, my hands trembling as I put the key in the ignition, started the engine, and drove off. I drove aimlessly, only knowing that I had to get away from that house, from that reality that was tearing my heart apart. I drove through the familiar streets, the ones that held every memory of my life with David. The coffee shop where we had our first date when he was still a clumsy boy who would blush when he held my hand. Daniel's old school where I took him every morning while David waited for him at the gate on weekends. Every corner was a stab, reminding me of the days when I thought my family was the most perfect thing in the world. But now, it was all a lie. The phone in my purse rang again and again. I looked at the screen. Messages from David. "Emily, I'm sorry. Let me explain." Then from Sarah. "Mom, I made a mistake. I don't know what to say." I ignored everything. I let the phone ring in vain. I drove on and on until the old lighthouse by the sea appeared in front of me. That place was once everything to me. More than 30 years ago, under the evening light, David knelt, took my hand, and told me he wanted to spend his whole life by my side. I cried. I nodded, and I felt like the happiest woman in the world. But now, sitting in the car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, all I could hear were the waves crashing outside, mixed with the insistent ringing of the phone. I didn't cry. Maybe because I was too in shock, or because the pain inside me had passed the point of turning into tears. I just stayed there looking at the sea with the feeling that my heart was being torn to pieces. David, the man I had loved and shared half my life with, had now betrayed me with my own daughter-in-law. Sarah, the girl I had welcomed into my home like a daughter whose hand I had held and advised on the day she married Daniel, my son. What had they been doing behind my back? For how long, and Daniel, my boy, did he know anything? That thought shook me. How could I look my son in the eye when his own father and his wife had stabbed us with the same knife? I gripped the wheel until my knuckles turned white. The sound of the waves remained the same constant, as if nothing had changed, but for me, everything had collapsed. I didn't know where to go or what to do next. I just knew that at that moment I was more alone than ever. The lighthouse was still there, silent, a witness to both my happiness and my pain. And I, a 57-year-old woman who thought she had built a solid family, now only had broken pieces in my hands, not knowing how to pick them up. That night, I couldn't go back to the house I had called home for over 30 years. Just the thought of walking through that door, the place where I saw David and Sarah tangled on the couch, made my chest tighten. I drove aimlessly until my eyes found the worn sign of the Grandview Hotel, a discreet place on the outskirts of the city. I stopped, went into the reception, and with a voice almost breaking, I asked for a single room. The clerk looked at me. Maybe she noticed my swollen eyes and my shattered appearance, but she didn't ask anything. She just handed me the key in silence. I dragged my small suitcase to the cold room, closed the door, and for the first time that day, I let myself fall to the floor, covering my face with my hands. But the tears wouldn't come. Maybe the pain was so great that I no longer knew how to express it. The next morning, I forced myself to get up, put on my hospital uniform, and went to work as if nothing had happened. I couldn't let this destroy my career, the place where I had dedicated my life to caring for others. At the clinic, I smiled at the patients. I asked them how they were as usual, but every time I wrote notes in the files, my hand trembled as if the words were trying to hide the truth that was consuming me from within. Linda, the nurse closest to me, noticed immediately. She pulled me into a corner during our break, her voice worried. "Emily, are you okay? You look exhausted." I just shook my head and forced a weak smile. "It's just a long shift, Linda. Nothing's wrong." But her eyes remained fixed on me, as if she knew I was hiding something terrible. At noon, while I was leaning my head over some notes in the break room, the door flew open. I looked up and my heart skipped a beat when I saw David standing there, a bouquet of white roses in his hand. He walked in smiling, as if nothing had happened the night before. "Hello, everyone," he said loudly, full of confidence, and turned to Linda and the other curious coworkers. "I came to spoil my wife. She's been working too hard lately." The whole clinic burst into laughter and playful comments. A nurse patted my shoulder and said loudly, "Emily, you're so lucky. With a husband like that, anyone would be green with envy." I stood there motionless, feeling my whole body freeze. To everyone, it was a romantic gesture, but to me, that bouquet was a blatant lie, a slap in the face. I took the bouquet of flowers reluctantly, my hands stiff. David took that moment, grabbed my hand, pulled me towards him, and whispered, "Emily, give me a chance to explain, I'm begging you." His voice trembled. His eyes were full of pleading, but I only saw falsehood. I pulled my hand away gently but firmly, and then looked at Linda. "Linda, could you help me take this bouquet to the break room, please?" I tried to keep my voice calm, but inside rage and pain were burning me. I didn't want to look at him for another second. My colleagues kept laughing and talking, unaware of the suffocating tension between us. When I left the hospital at the end of my shift, I saw David waiting for me, leaning against his car. His eyes no longer had the confidence of before now. They were full of pleading, almost desperation. He came forward, blocked my way, and spoke in a low but hurried voice. "Emily, what you saw last night wasn't the truth. I swear it was just a mistake. I drank too much, and Sarah, she couldn't control herself either. It was just weakness. I'm begging you." I looked him straight in the eyes, searching for some sincerity, but all I saw was the panic of someone making up excuses. I said nothing, just walked around him in silence, opened my car door, and drove away. His voice calling my name was lost in the wind. When I got to the hotel, I locked the room and sat on the hard wooden chair by the window. The phone rang. This time it was the front desk. The girl on the other end hesitated a little. "Ma'am, there's a man who says he's your husband. He's in the lobby and wants to see you." I felt a knot in my chest. David had followed me here. I took a deep breath and answered coldly, "Please tell him I don't want to see anyone, and don't let anyone come up to my room." I turned off the phone's ringer, threw it on the bed, and opened my laptop. My hands trembled as I typed into the search bar. "Divorce lawyer near me." I reviewed pages articles on asset division rights after divorce. Every line was a reminder that my marriage, what I had built with all my heart, was falling apart. I opened my email, looked for the password to the work account that David had given me access to. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I needed proof, something solid to hold on to in the middle of this storm. I printed out some shared bank account statements, cold numbers that showed the years I spent building everything with him. I saved some of his work emails, thinking they might be useful. Everything was organized in a folder on the table. I looked at it and felt like I was preparing for a battle I never thought I'd have to fight. That night, lying in the unfamiliar hotel bed, I couldn't sleep. The sound of yesterday's waves still echoed in my head, mixed with the image of David and Sarah on the couch. I thought about Daniel, my son. Did he know anything? How could I tell him that his father and his wife had betrayed us both? The pain wasn't just mine, it was also for Daniel, the son I raised and loved more than myself. I hugged the pillow, trying to force myself to close my eyes, but my mind was full of unanswered questions. David, the man I had trusted completely, was now a stranger. Sarah, the girl I had treated like a daughter, had stabbed me in the heart. The next morning I walked into the hospital with a knot in my stomach like a storm raging in my chest. I put on my uniform, checked the appointment schedule, and tried to focus on work, but every smile I gave to the patients was fake, like a mask to hide the pain. The image of David and Sarah on that couch haunted me every moment, like a slow-motion movie that never stops. I wondered how I could get through the day when my whole world had collapsed in a single moment, but I had to carry on because work was the only thing keeping me afloat. At lunchtime, as I sat in the break room sipping a cold coffee, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel, my son. "Mom, I need to talk to you alone. It's very important." I read those words and my heart sank. Daniel wasn't one to exaggerate, so I knew immediately it was something serious. I replied quickly, "Brewster's 1 o'clock. I'll be there." Brewster's Cafe was near the high school where Daniel taught, a quiet place with worn wooden tables where he and I used to talk when he was still in college. I put away my papers, asked to leave an hour early, and drove there, anxiety gnawing at me. When I entered the cafe, Daniel was already sitting in the most secluded corner by the window overlooking the street. His face looked haggard with dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept all week. I suddenly remembered little Daniel running into my arms after school with that smile that lit up everything. But now in front of me was a man with slumped shoulders carrying an unbearable weight. I sat down across from him, put my hand on the table, and asked softly, "Are you okay, Daniel?" He didn't answer right away, just looked at me with pain in his eyes, and then slowly he took an old cell phone out of his pocket and placed it on the table. "Mom, I want you to see this," he said with a hoarse voice, as if every word was a struggle. He unlocked the phone, scrolled through a series of messages, and handed it to me. I took it with trembling hands, not knowing what to expect. On the screen were conversations between David and Sarah, stretching back for months, even before Daniel and Sarah got married. I read, and every line was like a knife through my heart. They talked about meeting in hotels, sent intimate photos that I could barely look at. Worst of all, they made fun of Daniel, calling him naive, the husband who knows nothing. I moved to the next part and felt my breath catch when I read a message from David about me. "Emily is always busy. She doesn't pay attention to me anymore." To which Sarah replied, "She'll never understand you like I do." I put the phone down, feeling like I was sinking into an abyss. Daniel looked at me with reddened eyes, but he spoke firmly. "Mom, I suspected it for a long time." There were nights when Sarah came home late, said she was with friends, but I could smell Dad's cologne on her clothes. I kept telling myself it was my imagination. I even went to therapy because she told me I was pathologically jealous. But yesterday I took her laptop to prepare an urgent lesson without telling her. I accidentally opened her email and saw everything, messages, emails, everything between her and Dad. I copied everything to a USB drive, and I had to see you today. I was paralyzed, not knowing what to say. Daniel, the son I was always proud of for his strength and integrity, was now in front of me, shattered by the betrayal of his wife and his own father. I wanted to hug him to tell him everything would be okay, but I couldn't because I was breaking too. "Honey," I whispered, my voice breaking, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know things would get to this point." Daniel shook his head, took my hand, and said, "It's not your fault. I can't take it anymore. I want a divorce, but I can't just let them go, Mom. They've deceived us for too long." Hearing him, a flame ignited inside me. The pain was still there, but it was starting to turn into determination. I squeezed my son's hand tightly. "I don't want to let it go either, Daniel. We have to do something, not for revenge, but to get justice for both of us." Daniel nodded, and a glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes. We continued talking in low voices like two allies in the middle of a battle. I suggested we not act rashly, but gather more evidence and wait for the right moment to expose everything. Daniel agreed, saying he would keep an eye on Sarah, looking for more emails or messages she might have deleted. Before leaving the cafe, Daniel handed me a small USB drive cold in my hand. "Here's a copy of everything I found, Mom," he said firmly. "Keep it safe. I'll look for more if anything new shows up." I nodded, clinging to the USB drive as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. We hugged tightly, as if trying to give each other strength for what was to come. When Daniel left, I watched him walk away with a broken heart. My son didn't deserve this suffering, but I knew he was strong enough to endure, and I had to be too. Back at the hotel, I connected the USB to my laptop and opened the files one by one. Each message, each email was a stab, but I no longer let the pain overwhelm me. I read every line, noting the important details. There were passages where David promised Sarah he would resolve my situation, that he would find a way to get out of the marriage without losing anything. In others, Sarah wrote that she loved him, but confessed she was afraid of Daniel finding out the truth. Every word was a piece of evidence, another brick in the wall I would build to confront them. I classified everything in a folder, carefully marking each file, each date. I wasn't crying, I wasn't trembling. I was just focused like a doctor preparing for a complicated surgery. That night I called a law firm I had found the day before. The man who answered with a deep professional voice asked me what I needed. "Divorce," I replied with a strange calm. "And division of assets. I need to know what my rights are and how to protect my son." He gave me an appointment for the weekend and asked me to bring all the documentation. I hung up, looked at the folder on the table, and felt a bit of my strength returning. The next morning I woke up in the cold hotel room, a faint ray of sunlight coming through the curtain. The phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The screen showed dozens of missed calls from David. Every time I saw his name, it was like a new wound in my already bleeding heart. There were long, pleading messages. "Emily, please, let's talk. I need to see you to explain everything." I squeezed the phone, swiped my finger across the screen, but didn't reply immediately. I didn't want to hear any more lies, although I knew I had to face him, not to forgive him, but to start my plan. Finally, I wrote a short, cold message. 7 o'clock at Marcello's. Come alone. I chose Marcello's, the restaurant where we had celebrated our 35th anniversary, where David once raised his wine glass, looked at me smiling, and said, "You are my whole world." Now I wanted to see him there, sitting across from me, face to face with the truth. I arrived at Marcello's half an hour early. I chose a table by the large window overlooking the bustling street. The restaurant's yellow light illuminated the table, reminding me of the warm nights I once had with David. But today, I wasn't there for nostalgia. I put my purse on the chair. I checked the folder inside with the documents I had carefully prepared with the lawyer's help. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, although inside I was a raging sea of anger and pain. I watched the people pass by on the other side of the glass, wondering if David would really come alone or if he would continue to weave more lies. Right at 7, David walked in. He was wearing a blue shirt, the color I used to like, but he looked disheveled with tangled hair and red eyes as if he hadn't slept. He forced a smile when he saw me, but I just looked at him without responding. He sat down across from me, put his hand on the table as if to touch me, but I slowly pulled it away. "Emily." He started, his voice trembling. "I am so sorry. What happened with Sarah meant nothing. I only love you." "You have to believe me." Every word was like a knife sinking into my chest. I wanted to scream, to ask him why he betrayed me, why he betrayed Daniel, but I held back. I wasn't going to let him see me weak. Instead of answering, I silently took a brown envelope out of my purse and placed it on the table. "Open it," I said in a flat, emotionless voice. David looked at me suspiciously, but he opened it. Inside was the post-nuptial agreement my lawyer had drafted. I had read it over and over again all night. Every clause was clear. I would get the house, the savings accounts, and the majority of our shared assets. He would only be left with the car, the one he boasted so much about to his friends. David skimmed the pages, frowning, his mouth agape, as if he couldn't believe it. "Emily, are you serious?" he asked, his voice choked. "If you really want to fix this, sign it," I said, looking him in the eyes. "It's your only chance." I emphasized only, so he would understand this wasn't a game. David took the pen with a trembling hand, looked at me, then looked around as if afraid someone was watching him. "You're being very harsh, Emily," he tried to joke with a crooked smile. "I know I messed up, but we don't have to go this far." I didn't smile, just repeated in an icy voice, "Either you sign or we're done today." I saw him swallow hard, his eyes darting between me and the paper. Finally, he lowered his head and signed with messy handwriting as if he had no strength left. He didn't notice the small line at the end of the document, the clause that required him to break all contact with Sarah. I had put it in faint print on purpose, knowing he wouldn't read it carefully in his desperation. When he handed me back the agreement, he took my hand with moist eyes. "I'll prove it to you, Emily. I only love you. It will always be like that." I looked into those eyes that were once my refuge, but now I only saw falsehood. I pretended to nod, pulled my hand away, stood up and left. I didn't look back, but I knew he was still there, with a look of relief mixed with fear, like someone who has just escaped a nightmare, not yet knowing what the real price will be. On the way to the hotel, I called Daniel. "Your father fell for it," I said, my voice unable to hide a hint of satisfaction. "Now it's time to prepare the next step." On the other end of the line, Daniel let out a sigh. His tone sounded lighter. "I knew you could do it, Mom. You've always been stronger than all of us." My son's words warmed my heart, but they also reminded me of what we had lost. I drove through the night streets. The city lights shone, but I didn't feel as lonely as the first night. I was in control, and for the first time in many days, I felt like I could win. When I got to the hotel, I opened the room door and left the stack of documents on the table. I took everything out, the bank statements, the emails between David and Sarah, the messages Daniel had given me, and the newly signed post-nuptial agreement. I organized them into separate folders with the same care I used to prepare medical files at the hospital. Each sheet was another piece of my plan, a step towards justice for me and for Daniel. I opened a new notebook with a dark blue cover and wrote the first word. Plan. My handwriting was firm, without a tremble. I knew what I was doing, and I wasn't going to stop. The next morning, I woke up early, the faint light from the hotel window illuminating the table where the documents rested. I checked my phone and saw a message from Sarah. "Can we talk?" Just a few words, but they sent a chill down my spine. I didn't expect her to dare contact me directly after everything that had happened. A part of me wanted to ignore her, but another stronger part pushed me to confront her. I needed to look her in the eyes to hear what she had to say to justify her betrayal. I wrote my reply short and cold. 10 o'clock at Grandview Park by the duck pond. I chose the park because it was large open, and I didn't want this meeting to happen in a closed space where I might lose control. Before leaving the hotel, I checked my purse again, making sure the small stack of documents with some printouts of the messages and emails between Sarah and David that Daniel had given me was safely tucked away. I didn't know what I would do with them, but they were like a shield, a reminder that I was not just a victim, but the one who held the truth in her hands. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusted my coat, and took a deep breath. My face looked tired, but my eyes shone with a determination I didn't even know I had. I left the room and walked down the street in the cool morning with a heavy heart but firm steps. Grandview Park was calm that morning, the chirping of birds mixed with the gentle wind rustling through the trees. I arrived promptly at 10. I went straight to the duck pond where stone benches lined the water's edge. Sarah was already there, sitting with her head down, her hair hastily pulled back, her eyes red as if she had been crying. She was wearing a light sweater, looking fragile and weak, nothing like the seductive image I remembered on that couch. Hearing my footsteps, she looked up, her face filled with anguish. "Mom," she murmured, getting up and approaching as if to touch me. I held up my hand to stop her and sat on the opposite bench, keeping enough distance so she couldn't get any closer. "Speak, Sarah," I said in a cold, emotionless voice. I wanted to hear her out, but I was not going to let myself be broken. Sarah sat down, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze fixed on the ground. She took a deep breath and began, her voice trembling. "I know I was wrong, Mom. I never wanted to hurt you or Daniel, but I couldn't control it. I love him. I love David. I didn't know it would go this far." Her words were like a punch to my gut. I had seen Sarah as a daughter. I had held her hand on her wedding day with Daniel. I had taught her how to make the chili that David loved so much, and now she was here telling me she loved my husband, as if that could justify everything. I felt the anger ignite, but I held back, gripping the handle of my purse tightly. Without a word, I took a small folder out of my purse and placed it on the bench between us. I took out a few sheets. They were printouts of the messages Daniel had given me. The words were clear. Sarah called David love. They talked about meeting in hotels. They even made fun of Daniel for being too naive to notice. I pushed them towards her, my voice firm. "Daniel already knows everything, Sarah." "And so do I." She looked at the papers, her face pale, her trembling hands holding her head. "Daniel saw them," she murmured, as if she couldn't believe it. I nodded, not looking away from her. "He's already preparing the divorce papers, and I'm not going to let you and David keep seeing each other behind our backs." Sarah looked up. Her reddened eyes now shone with something different. It wasn't remorse, but desperation mixed with anger. Suddenly, her attitude changed. Her voice became sharper. "You're not planning to divorce David. He needs me, Mom. He told me his marriage to you is a burden, that he doesn't care about being with you anymore." Those words were like a sharp knife in the deepest part of my heart. I remembered the nights I worked late at the hospital, the times I turned down vacations with David because of my shifts, the moments I thought I was sacrificing for my family. But in the end, he had used all of that as an excuse to betray me. I interrupted her, my voice hard without hesitation. "From today on, you are not to contact David again. Don't call him, don't text him, don't go near him. If you do, you'll pay dearly." "Don't say I didn't warn you." I looked her straight in the eyes so she would understand I wasn't joking. Sarah opened her mouth as if to say something, but then she collapsed, covering her face as she sobbed loudly. I felt no compassion. I only saw a woman who had chosen to betray my family and who was now facing the consequences of that decision. I stood up, picked up the folder, and walked away, leaving Sarah on the bench, her cries mixing with the wind. On the way to the hotel, I sent a message to Daniel. "She's on the ropes. She won't last long." I imagined Daniel reading the message, perhaps feeling a little relief. I drove through the familiar streets, but my heart wasn't as heavy as before. The confrontation with Sarah didn't calm my fury, but it gave me a sense of regaining control. I was no longer the woman running from her own home. I was no longer the mother who silently carried the pain. I was fighting step by step for myself and for my son. A week after the confrontation with Sarah, I was still living in the small hotel room that had become my temporary refuge. Every morning I put on my uniform, went to the hospital, and tried to focus on work, but my mind always returned to the broken pieces of my family. David kept sending messages, calling, trying to convince me that everything could go back to the way it was. But I no longer believed those words. I had seen his true face too clearly and knew I was walking a path of no return. That night, David called with a sweet voice, like in the days when we were just starting to date. "Emily, let's have dinner together at La Perla, the place you like. I want us to talk." I hesitated, but I agreed. Not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I needed to understand what he was up to. The La Perla restaurant glowed with warm lights, the tables covered with pristine white tablecloths. I sat across from David watching him as he tried to create an atmosphere of reunion. He ordered my old favorite dish, grilled fish with passion fruit sauce, and told jokes about work, as if everything was fine between us. But I was just there eating in small bites, observing with a cold gaze. Then he lowered his voice, leaned towards me, and his eyes lit up. "Emily, I received an invitation from the Duarte Group in Seattle. They want me to be a partner. It's a great opportunity, you know." He paused as if to gauge my reaction and continued enthusiastically. "We can start over there, a house by the lake. You could work at a great hospital. I would have a stable job. We would grow old peacefully without the burden of children, just you and me." His words left me cold, not because of the pretty picture he painted, but because of how shameless he was. I looked into his eyes, searching for a bit of honesty, but I only saw the desperation of someone trying to cover up their guilt. A house by the lake, a new life, they were all empty promises to drag me into his charade. I nodded, my voice flat. "I'll think about it." David smiled, took my hand on the table, but I gently pulled it away, pretending to take a sip of wine to hide my contempt. I knew he didn't want to start over with me. He just wanted to keep me under his control, to continue his double life. The next day, while reviewing files at the hospital, Daniel called, his voice hurried, full of anger. "Mom, Sarah just texted me. She says she's going to Seattle with Dad. She says that when they go, he's going to choose her, that he's going to leave you." I felt my heart tighten, not with pain, but with the realization that Sarah still hadn't given up. Daniel sent me a recording Sarah had left on his voicemail. I played it and heard her choked voice. "Daniel, you don't understand. David loves me. He says that in Seattle, everything will be different. He'll be with me." It didn't surprise me, but it confirmed something. Sarah and David were still in contact, despite my warning. "Calm down, Daniel. This is our chance, son. She walked right into the trap. Don't worry. Let me handle it." I hung up, sat in the break room with my mind racing but firm in my decision. Sarah thought she could continue to manipulate, but she didn't know that I was ready, the messages, the emails, and now the recording. All of it was proof, the final bricks in my plan. I knew that to unmask them, I had to stay calm, lead them straight into the trap they were building for themselves. That night, I was at the hospital about to finish my shift, when David suddenly appeared with a huge bouquet of flowers, so flashy it was ridiculous. He walked into the break room with an exaggerated smile, greeting everyone loudly. "Good evening, everyone. I brought flowers for my wonderful wife." Linda and the other colleagues burst out laughing. Some even joked. "Emily, you really have the luck of 3 lifetimes." But I just stood there, feeling my blood run cold. David was acting too well, as if he really were the ideal husband, as if Sarah didn't exist, as if there were no secret affairs. I took the bouquet and forced a smile, though my eyes probably said it all. David didn't notice or pretended not to, and continued chatting with everyone, talking about his plan to start over in Seattle. When the group meeting ended, Linda pulled me into a corner and said in a low but firm voice, "Emily, at first I thought I admired him, but seeing the look in your eyes, I know you're going through something. He acts very well, but I believe you." Her words were like a cool breeze in the middle of the storm I was carrying inside. I took her hand and replied softly, "Thanks, Linda. I'm going to be okay." I didn't tell her the details, but her support made me feel like I wasn't alone. I left the hospital with the bouquet in my hand and threw it in the trash can on the corner. I didn't need those fake gifts from David. Later that night in the hotel, I turned on the computer and started writing a plan. I noted it down step by step, detail by detail, as if I were outlining a surgical procedure. The first step, keep David under control, make him believe I was still considering his proposal to go to Seattle. The second, watch Sarah wait for her to make her next mistake. And the last, prepare a scenario where they both unmask themselves with no possibility of denial. I thought of Daniel, of the pain he felt hearing Sarah's recording. I thought of myself, of the years of sacrifice for the family, only to receive betrayal in return. But I was no longer drowning in that pain. I felt a rebirth within me, as if the flame inside me had been rekindled stronger than ever. I sent a message to Daniel. "It's time to prepare for the next step, son. They will expose themselves, we just need to guide them carefully. Daniel replied right away, I trust you, Mom. Let's do it together. His words made me smile for the first time in many days. I looked out the window, the city lights shining in the night. I knew this battle wasn't over yet, but I was no longer afraid. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and felt my heart beat strongly, not with pain but with hope. I was coming back to life step by step, and no one was going to stop me. On the weekend night, I sat in the hotel room. The lamplight illuminated the plan notebook where I had been writing meticulously these past few days. I sent a message to Daniel asking to meet. I knew we needed to sit down and talk thoroughly to ensure everything went as we expected. When Daniel walked in with his laptop and a stack of documents in his hand, I saw a glint of determination in his eyes that I had never seen before. He was no longer the naive, docile son he used to be. Now he was a man ready to face the truth, however painful it might be. I hugged him, feeling the warmth of my son, and at that moment, I knew we were entering a battle together. We sat at the table and spread out all the documents, the copy of the post-nuptial agreement David had signed, the messages and emails between him and Sarah that Daniel had gathered, and the recording of Sarah's choked voice claiming David would choose her in Seattle. I looked at each sheet, each line, and felt as if I were tracing my own scars. Daniel pointed to the pile of documents, his voice deep but firm. Mom, if we just present this in court, Dad will continue to feign remorse. He'll say it was all a misunderstanding, that he loves you. I think we need a public place where he can't deny it, where everyone can see his true face. Daniel's words were like a ray of light clarifying the idea that had been floating in my head. I nodded and took a brochure from my purse that I had picked up from the hotel lobby, an advertisement for event planning services. In the center of the page was the title in large letters, Vow Renewal Ceremony. I pushed the brochure towards Daniel and said, I think this is the way, a vow renewal ceremony. David won't suspect a thing. He'll even think I want to give him a chance to fix things. Daniel frowned and then smiled slightly with a mischievous glint in his eyes. And when enough friends, colleagues, family are present, they will all be witnesses to the decisive moment, right, Mom? I smiled, feeling for the first time a little relief. My son was not only strong, but also smart, and together we were building an infallible plan. The next day I called David with a deliberately soft tone, as if I had already calmed down. David, I said, I've been thinking about what you said about Seattle, about starting over. I want us to do something special before we leave, a vow renewal ceremony to strengthen our love. On the other end of the line, I heard his sigh of relief and his excited voice. Emily, really? You don't know how happy you make me. I'll take care of everything. Don't you worry about a thing. I smiled, but not out of joy, but because I knew he had taken the bait. That same afternoon, David called a friend of his who worked at an event company, booked the most expensive package for the ceremony, and enthusiastically talked about inviting both colleagues and close friends. I listened to him talk on the phone with a cold heart, though on the outside I pretended to agree with all his ideas. While David was busy with the ostentatious preparations, Daniel and I silently organized our own plan. Daniel contacted a photographer friend, Michael, a discreet but reliable guy. He'll record the whole ceremony, Daniel said. Not just the nice moments, but also the main part. I nodded, feeling the complicity between mother and son. We agreed that Michael would place cameras at hidden angles, ensuring to record every detail when I exposed David and Sarah. I also spoke with Linda, the close nurse at the hospital. When I told her the general plan, she took my hand and said firmly, Mrs. Emily, I'll be there with the envelope of evidence in my purse. If you need anything, just call me. Her support was like a cool breeze, making me feel that I was not alone. In addition, I called the lawyer, Mr. Miller, with whom I had already spoken before. Mr. Miller, I said with a calm but firm voice, I need you to prepare the divorce papers. I want everything finalized on the same day as the ceremony. He agreed. He promised to bring the documents personally and advised me to stay calm so that everything would go well. I hung up the phone with the feeling that the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. That night, while reviewing the plan again, my cell phone vibrated. It was Rose, David's mother. Her voice trembled, full of emotion. Emily, you make me so happy. I was afraid you two would separate, but now that you've decided to renew your vows, I feel at ease. I'll be there without fail. I felt a lump in my heart. Rose had always loved me like a daughter, and I knew the truth would hurt her, but I just replied with a few words. Thank you, Mom. I'll be waiting for you there. After hanging up, I looked out the window. The city lights flickered before my eyes like fallen stars. I opened the plan notebook. I took the pen and marked a strong red line next to the words. Day of Reckoning. My handwriting was firm, without a single tremor. I thought about the past days. The pain of seeing David and Sarah on the couch. Daniel's devastation upon learning the truth. The nights I spent in a hotel wondering if I could bear it. But now I felt a rebirth in my soul. I thought of Daniel, of the firm look on the boy's face when we were planning. I thought of Linda, of her silent support. And I thought of Mrs. Rose, who would suffer but deserved to know the truth. The day of the celebration arrived. The Crystal Hall Hotel sparkled with white flowers and soft golden lights. The orchestra played sweet love songs, filling the air with melodies that I once thought would warm my heart. But today I wasn't there to reclaim happiness. I was in front of the mirror in the preparation room, wearing a long, ivory-colored dress, the same color David said made me look like an angel. I looked at myself in the mirror not to check my appearance, but to remind myself that I was Emily, the woman who had overcome pain to reach this moment. I took a deep breath, feeling the strength surge back inside me like a fire rekindled after days of being out. The hotel was full of guests, friends, colleagues, family, and also David's business partners. They laughed, talked, raised glasses, toasting our eternal love. I entered the ballroom on David's arm, he in a black suit and a satisfied smile, as if everything was already settled. He took my hand and whispered, "You look beautiful, Emily. Today will be a new beginning." I nodded, smiled softly, but inside I knew it wasn't a beginning but an end. I looked around the room. David's mother, Mrs. Rose, was in the front row, her eyes shining with joy, tightly clutching a silk handkerchief as if to contain her emotions. Beside her was Daniel, his face hardened, trying to stay calm, but I saw how his hands clenched on his legs, holding back his anger. And Sarah was there too, in a flashy dress with the LEB logo, sitting next to Daniel, smiling stiffly as she responded to greetings. She looked at me with a spark of unease in her eyes, though she tried to appear confident. I turned my gaze and found Linda in the crowd. She gave a slight nod, a sign that the envelope with the evidence was ready in her purse. I returned the gesture, feeling an ally confirming her position in the battle. The ceremony began. The host, a middle-aged man with a warm voice, invited us to the stage. Applause filled the room, and I felt dozens of eyes fixed on me. David held my hand, led me up, his eyes shining as if he really believed we were reconciling. The host handed him the microphone, and David began, his voice trembling, filled with emotion. "Emily, I promise to love you forever. Nothing and no one can ever separate us." Words that once made me happy, now they just repulsed me. I stood there smiling, but inside I was counting the seconds until the moment arrived. Just as David was about to take the ring from the velvet box, I raised my hand to stop him, my voice soft but firm. "Wait." I turned to the technician nearby. I gave him a signal with a slight nod of my head. The giant screen behind the altar immediately lit up, and a series of messages between David and Sarah appeared clearly. They were cold words, hotel appointments, jokes about Daniel and me. The room erupted in murmurs. The guests looked at each other in astonishment. Some covered their mouths, unable to believe what they were seeing. I heard Mrs. Rose stand up abruptly, her voice trembling. "It can't be!" "David, say something!" She almost screamed. Her eyes reddened, and her hand trembling, pointing at her son. David snatched the microphone, pale, stammering. It's fake." "Emily, what are you doing? How could you—" But his voice broke, lacking the strength to convince. I looked towards the rows of seats and saw Sarah motionless, her face ashen like a leaf covering her face, as if she wanted to escape everyone's gaze. I approached Linda, and she immediately handed me the envelope with the evidence. I opened it and threw the sheets one by one in front of the guests' printouts of emails, scheduled appointments, and even a recording that Daniel had sent. Sarah's voice came through the speakers, talking through sobs about her love for David and their plans to go to Seattle. The room fell into a deathly silence, broken only by murmurs that soon turned into whispers of outrage. Daniel stood up in the middle of the crowd, his voice strong without hesitation. "I am his son, and I was the one who gathered this evidence. He and my wife deceived my mother and me for years." My son's voice was like a hammer blow breaking the stillness. I looked at him, and inside me pride and pain mixed. Though shattered, my son was there firm and determined. I took another envelope from my purse, from which I extracted the divorce papers that Mr. Miller had prepared. I held them up for all to see and declared with a clear voice, "I'm keeping today's vow for myself, and you, David, from now on you have no right to be by my side." The room sank into a heavy silence, broken only by the sobs of Mrs. Rose, who collapsed into her chair, crying inconsolably. "David, how could you?" she repeated over and over, her voice in pieces. I felt a deep affection for her, a mother who had loved me like a daughter, but I knew this marriage had died long ago. David had to pay for what he did. Sarah tried to cover her face, but some guests had already recognized her, pointing and whispering. An older woman approached her mercilessly. "Shameless home wrecker." Sarah shrank, unable to look up. The atmosphere was suffocating. Cell phones started to light up. People took pictures, recorded videos, and I knew the news would spread like wildfire. But I didn't care. I had done what I had to do. I turned and walked down from the altar, leaving David behind, who stood motionless, his gaze lost amidst gestures of repudiation and contempt. Daniel followed me, put his hand on my shoulder, and said in a low voice, "Mom, I'm proud of you." I squeezed my son's hand, feeling his strength, and I smiled. Inside, a part of me was broken by what was lost, but another part was reawakening stronger than ever. As I left the ballroom, the yellow lights were still on, but I didn't look back. I knew that from that moment on, the future belonged to me. After the moment I stepped down from the stage, the Crystal Hall ballroom descended into chaos. The murmur of the guests rose like a wave, mixed with looks of contempt towards David and Sarah. I heard some whisper words like despicable and shameful. Many guests began to head for the door, but there were plenty who turned back, their eyes filled with indignation and disappointment. I walked down the hotel steps feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Daniel walked beside me, his steps firm, though I noticed his hands were trembling slightly, as if he were still containing his anger. We said nothing, just walked in silence outside, where Mr. Miller was already waiting for us with a packet of documents in his hand. Mr. Miller handed me a copy of the divorce papers, his gaze full of respect. "You did it, Emily," he said in a deep but firm voice. I took the pen and signed my name on the paper with smooth handwriting, without the slightest hesitation. Then I turned and saw David running towards me, his face pale sweat covering his forehead. He stopped in front of me, his eyes wild, trying to say something. "Emily, please, can we talk in private? You don't have to do this." I looked at him steadily, showing no emotion. "Sign it, David," I said coldly. "The whole world has just been a witness. You have no escape now." He hesitated, his trembling hand holding the pen, the ink smudging the paper as he signed, as if that signature were the final point of all his lies. Suddenly, David's mother, Mrs. Rose, staggered forward from the crowd. Her eyes were red, her face torn by pain. She stood in front of David, raised her fragile hand, and a slap echoed loudly in the air. "You have dishonored this family," she cried, her voice broken. "How did I raise you to dare to do something like this?" I stood there with a heavy heart. I loved Mrs. Rose. She had always treated me like a daughter, but I knew she had to face the truth, however painful it was. David lowered his head, unable to look at his mother, barely murmuring, "Mom, I'm sorry." Sarah pushed through the crowd, trying to get to David, taking his hand as if seeking refuge. "David, tell them you love me," she screamed desperately. But David snatched his hand away abruptly and roared, "Get lost! Sarah, don't follow me anymore." Her face froze, as if she had received an invisible slap. I silently took out my phone, opened the message I had saved from one of David's work emails, where he wrote to a colleague, "Sarah is nothing more than entertainment, a worthless puppet." I showed the screen to Sarah, my voice serene. "Maybe you thought you were special to him, but I'm sorry you were just a pastime for his bored moments." Sarah looked at the screen, her face contorted, her lips trembling, unable to speak. It was a moment before she caught her breath, turned to David and screamed, "Did you really say that you deceived me all this time?" But David just turned away, trying to hide in the crowd as if he wanted to disappear from all the gazes. Daniel stood in front of Sarah, holding out a packet of divorce documents, and declared firmly, "I'm not going to let you ruin my life anymore. It's all over." Sarah collapsed, covering her face and crying inconsolably, but no one from the crowd approached to comfort her. Some shook their heads, others whispered, while recording videos, and I knew that those images would soon spread throughout the city. I stood there watching Sarah collapse and David trying to escape, feeling as if a heavy curtain had just fallen. I didn't feel satisfaction, but a deep sense of release. I did what I had to do, not just for myself, but for Daniel and also for Mrs. Rose, who deserved to know the truth. When I turned around, Daniel took my hand and murmured, "Mom, we did it." I squeezed his hand, smiled, and for the first time in weeks, that smile was real. That same night, a local news portal published, "Businessman David Miller exposed in infidelity during vow renewal ceremony." I read the headline on my cell phone without any surprise. The videos and photos from the event had already spread rapidly, and I knew David couldn't escape the consequences. The next morning, I received a call from his company. A serious voice on the other end told me they had received dozens of emails and messages from the public questioning David's ethics. "We want to collaborate with you to clarify the situation," that person said. I nodded calmly and replied, "I'll give you everything you need." When I got to the hospital, Linda ran to my office, her eyes shining. "He didn't even dare to come in today, Emily." "Everyone already knows. I told you I trusted you." She hugged me, and I felt the warmth of a sincere friend. I smiled and said, "Thanks, Linda. I'll be fine." Those words were not only to reassure her, but also a promise to myself. I sat at my desk, looked out the window, and the morning light came in radiantly, like a reminder that I had already passed through the darkness. A few weeks after that night at the Crystal Hall, my divorce from David was officially finalized. I was at Mr. Miller's office signing the last papers with the feeling of having put a final period on a long, painful chapter of my life. According to the post-nuptial agreement David had signed, I got the whole house where we had lived and the bank accounts, things I had built with sweat and tears for over 30 years. David no longer had financial control. Rumors spread quickly in his business world. Partners withdrew their investments from his big project, and finally, the company fired him. I found out from a mutual acquaintance, but I didn't feel any joy. The only thing that washed over me was a serene relief, as if a wind had carried away the last remnants of my past. One morning, while organizing papers in the hotel room, my phone vibrated with a message from an old colleague from Austin, Dr. Linda, with whom I had done my residency at the hospital many years ago. "Emily, at my hospital, we're looking for a head of trauma. We immediately thought of you. What do you think of this opportunity?" I read and reread those lines with a racing heart. Austin, the place where I grew up, where the sun-drenched streets and the scent of orange blossoms brought back memories of my carefree youth. The idea of returning, of starting over with a challenging but meaningful position, ignited a spark within me. I replied, "I'll see you on my next work trip. I'll consider it seriously." I put the phone on the table, looked out the window, and imagined a new life, one where I could be myself without being tied to lies. One day, when I went to buy fish at the market near the hospital, the owner of the stall, who was always ready for gossip, whispered to me that Sarah had hastily gotten engaged to a young businessman from the city. I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't interested either. Just a few weeks later, she told me again that the fiancé had called off the wedding when Sarah's past came to light through videos and articles from the ceremony. I just nodded, saying nothing. Sarah had dug her own grave and no longer had a place in my mind. I learned to let go not because I forgave her, but because I deserved to live without being tormented by those who hurt me. Daniel, my son, was also starting over. He sold the house he shared with Sarah, a place that was once full of memories, but now were only scars. He moved into a small apartment near the high school where he teaches, where he finds joy in inspiring his students. One afternoon I visited him, bringing him a lunchbox with his favorite dishes, mac and cheese and rice pudding, like when he was a boy. We sat down to eat together in his tidy apartment, with the sunlight streaming through the window and illuminating everything. Daniel looked at me and smiled. "I feel truly free, Mom. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe." His words warmed my heart. I handed him the key to my old house, the one I had shared with David, and said softly, "If you want, consider it a place you can always come back to." Daniel clutched the key, his eyes shining. "Thanks, Mom. I know you're always there for me." One night, David's mom, Mrs. Rose, called me on the phone. Her voice sounded choked, full of regret. "Daughter, forgive me for not realizing sooner. I was blind to trust David." She had gone to live with her sister, turning her back on her son after everything that had happened. I reassured her with a soft voice. "Don't blame yourself. You were always a good grandmother to Daniel." "The fault is not yours. It's David's and Sarah's." She replied softly, "I still want to see my grandson if you'll allow it." I smiled into the phone. "You can come whenever you want. The boy surely misses you very much." Although it hurt, I knew that Mrs. Rose didn't deserve to be left out of our lives. She was still family in a way that David never would be. One early morning, I took my suitcase to the airport with a plane ticket to Austin to attend the interview. In front of the security checkpoint, I took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air of the new day. I opened my old plan notebook where I had jotted down every step to get here. I took a pen and crossed it out with a red line. Completed. Those 2 words were not just an endpoint, but a declaration of my freedom. I closed the notebook, smiled, and walked forward, knowing that from now on, the future was completely in my hands. No one had the right to decide it except me. I thought about the journey, the nights I spent in hotels, hugging the pain like a companion. I thought about Daniel, about my son's strength in facing the truth. I thought about Mrs. Rose, about the affection she always gave us, even though her own son destroyed everything. And I thought of myself, the woman who thought her life was over when she saw David and Sarah on the couch. But I am no longer that woman. I am Emily, a doctor, a mother, and a woman who found herself again. I passed through the security checkpoint with a light bag on my shoulder, but with a heart full of hope. I know that in Austin or wherever I go, I will write a new chapter, a chapter all my own. The story we tell is fictional, but it is based on some real events. The names and places have been changed to protect the identity of those involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I'm genuinely curious. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face it all to reclaim your voice? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I leave you with 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I assure you they will surprise you. Thank you for staying until the end.